There are places in the world that people don't talk about. Places where darkness consumes everything in its path, and the echoes of lost souls linger, never finding peace. One such place is the forgotten railway that winds through desolate woods, an old track that hasn't been used in decades. Few know its existence, but those who do speak in hushed tones, warning others to stay away. But some are drawn to the unknown, compelled by curiosity, or maybe fate. Lena wasn't supposed to be here. She was supposed to take the bus back home after a long day of work. Yet, here she is, on a train bound for somewhere, but nowhere. The journey, innocent enough at first, becomes a descent into madness as Lena quickly realizes she is not the only one aboard. The train, cold and unwelcoming, seems to move with an unnatural speed. Its wheels grinding against the tracks in the dead of night, where the only sound is the howling wind and the eerie whistle of the engine. In a few moments, Lena will come face to face with something that no one could have ever predicted. A terror that's been waiting for her from the moment she boarded. What happens next is a nightmare that she can't escape. Not now. Not ever. Welcome to The Last Passenger. Prepare yourself for the ride of a lifetime if you can survive it. Lena had always been a creature of habit. Every morning, she woke up at precisely 6:30 a.m., despite her disheveled attempts at hitting the snooze. But in a few extra times, she followed the same morning routine, grabbing a black coffee from the corner cafe, taking the subway to work, and sitting at her desk with a steady rhythm that barely changed from one week to the next. It was the kind of life that allowed her to blend into the background, unnoticed, undisturbed. Yet ironically, this predictability gave her a sense of peace. But tonight felt different. It had been one of those brutal days where nothing went according to plan. The office meeting dragged on longer than expected, leaving her exhausted and impatient. The fluorescent lights above buzzed with an incessant hum, almost as if they too were getting tired of the chaos. It had been an emotional roller coaster of revisions, brainstorming, and conference calls that left her mentally drained. She yearned for the quiet solitude of her small apartment, somewhere she could shed the weight of the day and simply collapse into bed, no questions asked. However, as she stepped out of her office building, a feeling of dread crept over her. The city felt off. The usual hum of traffic and the usual hustle and bustle of evening commuters seemed muffled, distant. There was something oppressive in the air, like a storm that hadn't yet broken but was waiting to unleash. She shook her head, trying to shake off the sensation. The city had been like this before, one of those rare quiet evenings when everything felt a little too still. Despite the eerie atmosphere, she pushed forward. As she made her way toward the station, she could see the familiar signs of life, the bright neon lights reflecting off rain-slicked sidewalks, the taxis honking impatiently at the lights, and the occasional street vendor shouting their wares. The station wasn't far from her office, just a few blocks away, but it felt like miles. By the time Lena reached the station, she was winded. The weather had taken a turn, and a cold breeze sliced through her coat. It had come out of nowhere, a sharp chill that made her wish she'd grabbed her gloves, but she was too tired to care now. The warmth of the station beckoning her forward. The station was nearly empty, a stark contrast to the usually packed crowds. The harsh fluorescent lighting made the space feel sterile, and the echo of her footsteps on the tiles only heightened her sense of isolation. It was as if the world had been emptied out, leaving only her and the looming train. She looked up at the electronic board. There it was, the last train of the night, the Mill Creek Express. Her heart skipped a beat. It was the last train, and there was no other option if she wanted to make it home. She had just enough time to catch it. The clock on the wall showed she had about 5 minutes left before it departed. Lena hurried toward the platform. The air was thick with the smell of diesel and rust. The sound of the train's distant whistle echoed through the tunnel, and as it grew louder, it felt as though it were calling to her. There was something unsettling about the sound of that whistle, something unnatural, like it was made of shadows rather than sound. Still, Lena pushed on, her legs aching from the day's work. She made it to the platform just in time. The train was pulling in, its lights cutting through the night like the eye of a storm. It was an old train, its design dated, the edges of the cars marked with rust and wear. The Mill Creek Express. The name felt familiar, but Lena couldn't place why. Had she taken this train before? It didn't matter, she reasoned. It was just another train, another routine. The train slowly rolled to a stop, and the doors opened with an eerie mechanical hiss. Lena stepped forward, her heart racing in anticipation. As she climbed aboard, she was immediately struck by the odd silence that enveloped her. It was as though the world had gone mute, leaving only the noise of her own footsteps as she made her way down the aisle. The train felt strange. The flickering lights above seemed to blink in time with her heartbeat, and the walls seemed to close in around her, tightening just a little. She glanced over her shoulder, half expecting someone to be standing right behind her, but the space was empty. She swallowed her unease, trying to chalk it up to tiredness. As she moved further into the car, Lena was confronted with the silence once again. The only sound was the creaking of the old train and the soft shuffle of her footsteps. There was no chatter, no bustling voices, nothing. The emptiness felt suffocating, but Lena dismissed it. Perhaps the train had been delayed, or maybe it was just too late for people to be heading out. Still, a part of her couldn't shake the unease gnawing at her stomach. The interior of the train was decorated in a strange mix of old-world charm and decay. The seats, once plush and regal, were now worn and faded. Their velvet fabric had long since lost its rich color, replaced by a dull, worn brown that matched the tone of the rest of the train. The windows were dusty, their edges caked in grime, and the light above seemed dim, barely illuminating the aisle. She moved toward an empty seat near the window. Lena set her bag down beside her and sank into the plush seat, letting out a sigh of relief. The train was quiet now. The only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional rattle of the tracks beneath. Lena leaned back, gazing out the window as the train slowly began to move again. The city lights outside flickered, growing distant as the train picked up speed. She felt the familiar pull of exhaustion sink into her bones as the rhythmic motion of the train lulled her into a stupor. Her eyelids felt heavy. She should stay awake, but she was so tired. Tired in a way that wasn't just physical. She was drained emotionally, mentally, like something inside of her had been used up and left hollow. The train moved steadily forward, winding its way through the city, and Lena let her thoughts drift. For a moment, she almost forgot where she was. But that didn't last long. A sudden feeling of wrongness surged through her. The lights flickered once more violently this time, before returning to their dim, flickering state. Then, she felt it. A cold, almost unnatural draft, creeping down the aisle. Lena shivered, instinctively pulling her coat tighter around herself. But the draft was strange, like it was coming from nowhere, like the train was no longer sealed from the outside world. She looked down at her hands, her fingers cold and stiff. She rubbed them together in a nervous attempt to regain warmth, but the chill seemed to sink deeper into her skin. The train swayed gently as it moved along the tracks, but something about the motion now felt wrong. There was no reason for her to feel like this. She tried to shake off the unease that was creeping into her chest, but it didn't work. Every inch of her body screamed for her to leave, to get off the train. But it was the last train, and there was no other option. She was stuck. As she looked out the window again, the city was gone. In its place, there was nothing but darkness. The kind of darkness that didn't feel natural. It was a deep, thick blackness that seemed to swallow everything whole. Her heart began to race and she glanced at the door, wondering if she should get up and leave. But as soon as she moved, she noticed something, or rather, someone across from her. The man. He was sitting just across the aisle, his eyes locked on hers. He was tall, wearing a long, dark coat that seemed to absorb the dim light around him. He didn't move, didn't blink. He was staring at her with an unsettling intensity. Lena's breath caught in her throat. This wasn't normal. This wasn't just someone minding their business. This was something far more sinister. She wanted to turn away, to ignore him, but she couldn't. There was something about him, something about the way he watched her, that made her feel as though she had just stepped into a nightmare. His gaze was unblinking, unfeeling, and the longer she stared, the more she felt herself drawn into it. It wasn't just his gaze. It was everything about him. His stillness, his presence. The silence in the air felt heavier now. Lena could feel her pulse quicken. She wanted to look away, but it was as if her body wouldn't respond. She was trapped in the moment, caught in the strange pull of this man's unrelenting stare. Lena's breath caught in her throat, her heartbeat quickening as the man's gaze locked onto hers. The silence in the train car was now suffocating, heavy with an unspoken tension that made the air feel thick and unbreathable. She wanted to look away, to ignore the unsettling presence across from her, but it was impossible. Something about the way he stared at her, with such cold, intense focus, kept her rooted to the spot. Her hands, which had been nervously clutching the armrest of the seat, were now clammy with sweat. Lena shifted in her seat, trying to find a more comfortable position, but the feeling of being watched was inescapable. The man was still staring. His face was pale, almost ghostly in the dim light of the train. His features were sharp, angular, but his eyes were what struck Lena the most. They were a deep, unsettling shade of gray, almost silver, and they seemed to gleam in the darkness like polished stones. There was no warmth in them, no hint of empathy or emotion. They were cold, calculating, and distant. Lena swallowed hard. She told herself it was just her imagination. He was probably just another tired commuter, just as exhausted and drained from the day as she was. Yet, despite her rational thinking, a deep, gnawing feeling in her gut told her that something wasn't right. The way he sat, still, motionless, like a predator lying in wait, made her skin crawl. She tried to turn her attention elsewhere. The train's rattling seemed louder now, as though it was a warning, a signal that something was about to go terribly wrong. The sound of the train's engine reverberated through the floor and walls, a low, throbbing hum that made her feel like she was being drawn deeper into the heart of something that she couldn't control. But no matter how hard she tried, her eyes kept drifting back to him. The man remained perfectly still, not even blinking. His posture was rigid, as though he was waiting for something, or someone. Lena felt her pulse race. She wasn't sure why, but she suddenly had the overwhelming sensation that something awful was about to happen. Suddenly, the lights above flickered again. This time, it wasn't a simple flicker. The light surged, then dimmed dramatically, as if the power itself was being drained from the train. A low buzzing sound filled the air, like an electrical current struggling to stay alive. Lena instinctively pulled her coat tighter around her, her heart pounding in her chest. And then, in the eerie stillness of the train, the man spoke. "Do you believe in the things that hide in the dark?" Lena froze. Her blood ran cold. The words were slow, deliberate, and cut through the air like a blade. She stared at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. Was this man really speaking to her? Was he asking her something so bizarre? I don't understand," Lena stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. The man didn't answer immediately. He simply kept staring at her with those unnervingly lifeless eyes, as though he were examining her, calculating every word, every movement. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. "There are things in this world that people don't understand. They think the night is just a time to sleep, to rest. But it's more than that. Much more." Lena's hands clenched into fists. Her breath was shallow, quick. Was this some sort of twisted joke? What was he talking about? He was scaring her. This whole situation felt off. This man, this place, the silence. It was all wrong. I don't know what you mean, she said, her voice gaining a little more strength as she tried to push back against the sense of fear that was threatening to overwhelm her. I think you're just tired, like everyone else on this train. Maybe you should get some rest. But he didn't break his gaze. His eyes never wavered from hers. Instead, his lips curled into a thin, cold smile, one that didn't reach his eyes. You don't understand yet, but you will. It's all in the darkness. It's always been there. And now, it's coming for you. Lena's heart skipped a beat. The words seemed to linger in the air long after he spoke them, like a dark omen that threatened to swallow her whole. The train jolted, snapping her out of her trance. The sudden motion almost made her lose her balance, and she gripped the seat to steady herself. She glanced around, trying to find some sense of normalcy, but the train was still eerily quiet. The only sound the low hum of the engine and the occasional clink of metal on metal. Lena's eyes darted to the other end of the car. There was no one else there. She hadn't noticed before, but the entire train car was empty. The only other person in the car was the man sitting across from her. The train lurched again, this time more violently, and the lights above flickered once more, plunging them into complete darkness for a split second. When the lights returned, the train car seemed even colder than before. The air was thick, oppressive, and a strange metallic smell lingered in the air. She could feel it now. The weight of the silence, the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to have settled in the train. It wasn't just the man's presence that unnerved her. It was something much larger, something darker. Suddenly, the train came to a screeching halt, throwing Lena forward into the seat in front of her. She gasped, her body slamming against the armrest. For a moment, she thought she'd lost her balance entirely, but her grip on the seat held steady. Her head throbbed with pain from the impact, and she rubbed her temples in an attempt to steady herself. As the train ground to a halt, the silence that followed was deafening. No one had moved, no announcements had been made, and the train didn't seem to be going anywhere. Lena could only hear the soft ringing in her ears, and her own ragged breathing. Why did we stop? She muttered under her breath, glancing nervously at the man. But there was no answer. Her instincts screamed at her to leave, to find a way off this train before it was too late. But the doors were locked. The train wasn't stopping at any station. It was stranded somewhere between destinations, in the middle of nowhere. The man's voice broke through her thoughts again. You can't leave. You shouldn't have come. Lena's stomach dropped. What was happening? Why couldn't she leave? What had she gotten herself into? The screeching halt of the train had left Lana in a state of frozen confusion. The air around her felt suffocating, thick with an unseen weight that seemed to press down on her chest. She could still hear the eerie hum of the train's engine, but it was more like a low, mournful moan now, as if it were wounded. The train had stopped, but it wasn't the kind of stop Lena had experienced before. There were no scheduled stops, no announcements, and, most importantly, no reason for the sudden halt. Lena glanced around the dark, empty car once more. The man across from her still hadn't moved. He was as motionless as before, staring at her with those piercing, cold eyes. And now, Lena could feel a creeping sense of unease rising up inside her. Was this really happening? Was this a nightmare? The cold sweat that had begun to form on the back of her neck slowly trickled down her spine, and she wiped her hands on her pants. What was going on? She tried to convince herself that it was just some mechanical issue, that it was no big deal. But the feeling in her gut told her otherwise. This isn't normal, she muttered under her breath, staring at the man, who was still watching her, unmoving. For a moment, she considered getting up and walking to the front of the train to speak with the conductor or check the situation. But as her hand rested on the seat, ready to push herself up, she froze. The stillness of the train had settled into something darker, something dangerous. There was a presence here, something that wasn't just the man across from her. It was as if the train itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lena's heartbeat quickened as she looked out of the window. All she could see was the dark blur of the tracks, swallowed up by the endless night. There were no lights, no signs of civilization, just the vast empty blackness stretching as far as the eye could see. They were alone, but not entirely alone. Her eyes flickered back to the man. There was something unsettling about his stillness, the way he sat there without so much as a twitch. It was unnatural, almost as if he were part of the shadows. His gaze had not left her. And now, Lena realized something even more disturbing. He was waiting for her to react. "You shouldn't have come," the man said, his voice barely audible but thick with menace. The words sent a chill down her spine, and Lena's breath caught in her throat. The way he said it made it clear that he wasn't talking about the train or the journey. It was something much more personal, something darker. "Why?" Lena managed to whisper, her voice trembling slightly. "Why shouldn't I have come?" The man didn't answer right away. Instead, he tilted his head slightly, as if considering her question. The way he did it made her feel like an insect being studied under a magnifying glass, an object to be inspected, probed, and ultimately crushed. "Because this train isn't going anywhere anymore," he said slowly, his voice deliberate and cold. "The journey is over." Lena felt a jolt in her chest, and for a moment, it felt as though the floor beneath her feet had disappeared. "The journey is over." The words hung in the air like an incantation, like a death sentence that had already been written. Her mind raced, but the answer eluded her. What did he mean? Was he talking about the train? The destination? Or was there something deeper, something more sinister at play here? The more she tried to think, the less she understood, and the more desperate she became. Suddenly, the lights above flickered again, more violently this time. The bulbs buzzed and crackled, flickering as though they were about to give out completely. Then, just as quickly, the lights went out entirely, plunging the train car into an oppressive darkness. Lena gasped, her heart pounding as her hand scrambled for the armrest. She instinctively tried to calm her racing thoughts, but the darkness around her only intensified the panic building in her chest. She had never been afraid of the dark, until now. In the pitch-black silence, Lena's senses became hyper-aware. She could hear the faint rustling of fabric, the man's clothes shifting as he moved in the dark. She didn't want to look. She couldn't look. The fear that gripped her was too powerful, too consuming. Every fiber of her being screamed at her to run, to escape, to get away from this suffocating presence. Her breathing came in shallow gasps, her hands trembling as she reached for the small flashlight in her bag. She flicked it on, the weak beam cutting through the darkness, revealing nothing but the empty train car. Nothing but the man. "Why are you doing this?" Lena asked, her voice barely audible, betraying the terror she felt inside. The man didn't reply. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his gray eyes glowing faintly in the dark, like two pale moons. He didn't need to speak for her to understand. His gaze said it all. He had been waiting for this moment. For the train to stop, for the darkness to take over. She couldn't stay on this train any longer. She had to get off. She had to escape, or else she would become part of whatever nightmare this train was dragging her into. With trembling hands, Lena gripped the armrest and pushed herself up, determined to make her way to the front of the train. But as she stood, something caught her attention. A sound. It was faint, almost imperceptible, but it was there. A low, guttural growl. The sound came from beneath the floor, from the very belly of the train. At first, Lena thought it was just her imagination, but as the growl grew louder, deeper, she knew it was real. Something was in the train. The growl turned into a full-blown roar, shaking the walls and making the floor tremble beneath her feet. Lena stumbled backward, her heart in her throat as she looked around, trying to find the source of the terrifying sound. The train was no longer just a place of confinement. It was alive, and something monstrous was hidden within its walls. Suddenly, the man spoke again, his voice eerily calm in the chaos. "They're here, and they want you." Lena's blood turned to ice. She backed up, her feet stumbling over the floor as she rushed toward the nearest exit. But the doors wouldn't open. They were locked. The growls grew louder, and she could feel the vibrations shaking through her body. Whatever was in the train was coming for her. If you thought things couldn't get worse for Lena, think again. The danger she faces inside the train is just beginning. And the truth behind her terrifying journey is more horrifying than she could ever imagine. Don't miss the next episode of The Last Passenger. The nightmare is far from over. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what happens next. Trust me, you won't want to miss this.